All right. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a special presentation. We're joined by Brianna Suarez from the Association for Professional Schools in International Affairs, which we lovingly refer to as APSIA. Brianna has been a visitor to Rutgers Camden in the recent past, but today she's joining us virtually to share information about graduate schools and careers related to international affairs. And at the end of this presentation, she will share her contact information for one-on-one outreach. But for the moment, I am going to turn it over to Brianna.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you all who are watching this today. My name is Brianna Suarez, and I'm the International Admissions and Operations Manager here at the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, otherwise known as APSIA. And a little bit of background on APSIA before we get started. APSIA is the consortium of all of the leading graduate schools that specialize in international affairs and public policy around the world. So currently we have more than 60 members in 18 different countries. So for those of you that are interested in completing a master's, mid-careers, or PhD program, you can do so at any of our APSIA campuses worldwide. And so for a full list, you can head over to our website at www.apsia.org. But today, I'm here to talk to you all about careers in international affairs, as well as preparing for graduate school in international affairs. And again, I will make sure to share my contact information at the end of this presentation so that you all can reach out if there are any questions after this presentation. But with that, I'm going to share my screen and get us started. Right. Okay, hopefully you can see the screen. Everything's all right. All right, great. So international affairs is a very interdisciplinary field. And so it prepares you for a range of careers. A lot of students tend to think that there is only one path into international affairs, that it's solely diplomacy or solely the foreign service, when in actuality, there's so many paths that students can take. Specifically, graduate schools in this field prepare you to look at issues from different various angles. So it's not just, again, one view of a specific issue. It can be the economic side of things. It can be political side. It can be the cultural side. Again, just because of the nature of this field. And so there are so many avenues that you can explore. One that we often get students asking us about is law. You can work in the law field and not have a JD within international affairs. You can work in science and technology. You can work in energy and the environment, climate change, space policy, which I think is a really cool new topic, communications, public relations. Ultimately, there's a path for you all in international affairs. It really comes down to connecting your interests and figuring out ultimately what is the kind of work and impacts that you want to have in this field. And so a way to start thinking about this, and as we say, channeling your interests, is asking yourself certain questions. So, for example, maybe you're someone that likes to tackle big problems. So, for example, the problem of poverty, the environment, disease, as we've seen with COVID, right? So, unpacking these big kinds of topics may be of interest to you. Others may have, as we say, the call to service. So that is the want of helping people. Maybe it's connecting with underrepresented groups. Maybe it's, groups that are marginalized, right? It's that need to connect and create change for those groups. Maybe you're just someone like me who just loves to travel and is curious about the world and wants to kind of use these skills to work in a certain field. And you may not know what, but you just love to see the world, love cultures, love languages, learning new languages. That may be a path into international affairs for you. Some like the traditional path, right, of just politics and governments, seeing how policy choices affect people in their day-to-day lives. And you may want to be someone that's at the table making those decisions, right? So that is another path into international affairs. There's also the debating and arguing, right? So you're someone who likes to use your communication skills and connect with others in that way and challenge others on specific topics. Maybe that's just something for you. And then maybe there isn't one of these that appeals to you, but you just know that you want to play a role in social change. Ultimately, again, the idea of coming into international affairs is a very dynamic one and one that you can really channel any and all interest to come in and work in this space. And so here is a quick slide of how you can think about your majors, right? There's not necessarily one major that you need to have to be in the international affairs space. I know many students think, right, that they didn't do international affairs or poli-sci major and that they can't work in this space. When in actuality, there's a ton of ways that you can combine your majors and your interests to have a career in this space. So for example, maybe you're someone that is really into computer science and policy. You can be a cybersecurity fellow. In the State Department, the US State Department, they are always looking for those that are interested in tech and cybersecurity to work at their agency. Maybe you're someone who specifically studied, let's say, China, and you're also interested in journalism, right? Communications. You could be a human rights monitor, right? Maybe you're someone that is really into numbers, economics, and oh, but you're also into diplomacy and how states work together. Maybe you could be a trade negotiator. Ultimately, there's a ton of ways of putting your majors and interests together to formulate a career that is, fulfilling to you down the line. So what do you need? What are the skills you need to build to start preparing for a career in international affairs? The first is building professional experience. And I often like to say that it's not always the traditional 9 to 5 experience that students tend to think, right? You don't always have to get that 9 to 5 job. Professional experience can come in lots of shapes and ways. That could be being a barista at Starbucks. That can be doing work study while you are a student, right? An undergrad. That could be being a caregiver for a family member. Ultimately, professional experience is just the way that we say getting some experience that exposes you to the world and to work in a professional setting. We have international in parentheses because we understand that not every student has the ability to go work abroad. However, I do want to emphasize that many organizations, depending on where they're based, can be considered an international experience. So, for example, for myself, I worked with Doctors Without Borders after I graduated from undergrad. And that is considered an international experience because I was working with our offices in France, with our offices in Spain. So I was working globally with colleagues around the world. So these experiences would be considered international. The ability to write well, speak comfortably, and get some language proficiency is pretty important. So we all know how to write in the standard 10-page, 20-page, 40-page paper, right? Especially if we're going through undergrad. But that's not how we communicate in a professional setting. So being able to write and convey information in a concise and succinct manner is going to be pretty important, right? So going beyond the 40-page paper and being able to summarize a topic that is very complicated in a page and a half or 2 pages is going to be pretty important. Speaking comfortably to different audiences is also going to be important, right? Not everyone is going to have all of the knowledge that you have on a specific topic. So being able to relate to others and convey this information to them, even if they don't have the knowledge you have, is going to be pretty important in this field because you're going to be coming up against different or coming and relating with different colleagues that may not have the experiences that you have. So you're going to have to be able to relate and convey information to them in a comfortable manner. Language proficiency, right? So being able to, and I won't even say the traditional way that we speak of languages as the spoken language, right? While that is great, and we should definitely try to get a different language, the skill of a different language, that can also be learning to use certain platforms that others may not have. And we'll get into the quant and analytical side of that shortly, but having those kinds of skills is going to be important, especially in a field like international affairs. So analytical skills, right? Critical thinking. This is to say understanding data. So looking at data sets, data numbers, and being able to unpack what that says. What are the trends that you're seeing from this data? What are the numbers telling you is important in this field, right? Because it's not just the written, the qualitative portion of things, but it's also the quantitative portion of data. Especially if you can become proficient in different platforms such as ArcGIS, R, SPSS. This is the technical side of things. Those are skills that not many international affairs practitioners have. So if you're able to get that as early as possible, that would be great because it sets you apart in the job market. And I know as an experience that even at Doctors Without Borders, we would have volunteers come in for during the weekends to help us map out certain regions. And we would teach you the platform for free. You would just have to volunteer a Saturday of your day, work with us, and you would get that knowledge. So it's looking for ways to capitalize and get these kinds of skills in an easy manner, I would say, is always great. Understanding project management. So I know many schools have certificates for this, but you don't necessarily have to get one. At this point in your careers, you've done projects with others. But what we say is it's understanding how things are implemented, come from when you're thinking it, how do you execute a project, and what cleanup will look like. And then building your network. Again, understanding that those that are around you are part of your network. A lot of undergraduate students think that they don't have a network, but that's not true. I mean, all of the students that are part of your classes are part of your network. The alums that have gone to Rutgers Camden are part of your network. The professors that you've worked with, supervisors, all of these people are really important because you never know who's going to write you a recommendation letter or be able to recommend you for a job moving forward. And so I won't last too long on this slide, but we like to give, a couple of pointers on where to get these experiences, especially if you can leave home or if you just want to do it remotely. So there are remote internships and volunteer opportunities that you can take advantage of. For example, I often point to the State Department. They have a virtual internship that you can apply for where you can just complete your work, remotely and still be considered an intern at the State Department. There's also the local to global connections. So what does that mean? Students often tend to think of organizations such as the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, right, as doing this grand work, but they don't think about the local organizations that are doing that kind of level work as well. A lot of the UN agencies connect with local organizations on the ground to promote the change, the work that they're doing. And so thinking about those organizations that are close by to you in your area that are doing the kind of work you want to do can be really helpful, right? You don't have to go to DC, you don't have to go to New York City to work in these spaces. You can find local organizations, local chapters of the larger organizations right at home. Writing blogs and research, right? So getting those writing skills early on from home is always helpful, as well as writing for opinion pieces for newspapers, whether it be the newspaper in your university or even submitting it to the local newspaper. That's a good way to learn to write in different formats. Freelance projects, contract work, a lot of organizations are often looking for contractors, right? So something that I say to students, right, you may not necessarily get that perfect job that they were, advertising for, but more often than not, a lot of organizations are often looking for contractors that they can hire for a specific term, whether it be 6 months, a year, or 2 years, and you'd still be working at that agency doing that kind of work. So look for these opportunities. And then online meetups and discussion boards, right? Connecting with those that may have the same interest as you virtually without having to go to a meeting, without having to go in person to a local meetup. Many organizations often have webinars, have discussion boards that you can join, and just again, learn of people in this field that you're interested in and making those connections early on. And so when you're applying for organizations, international affairs to work in this space, we can't stress enough that every application will vary. But this is generally what an application looks like for a job in the space of international affairs. The first two are fairly, common, a cover letter and a resume or a CV. If you don't know the difference, head over to the Career Center at your university. They usually can help you determine which is the one that you're going to need for the job that you are applying to. But what we like to say about the cover letter and resume is that they need to live together, right? You don't know which one the employer will start with. Maybe they will start with your cover letter, or maybe they'll start reading your resume first. Ultimately, you're going to want either or to get the employer enticed to read the other. So you want these two to live together. And I know that as students, right, we get overwhelmed with having to write multiple cover letters, but it really does make a difference, especially now in my position where I'm the one making the decisions of which intern we bring in, right? I'm reading cover letters and resumes, and I know the importance now. as the employer of those two living together and telling the full story of who you are and what you're going to do as an employee in this organization. And we'll get a little bit into more of those two and how to formulate those. But for those undergrads that are going straight into the jobs force, you may need to provide official transcripts from each institution that you've matriculated into, solely because they want to see the coursework that may be relevant, right? You may not have the necessary professional experience at this point because you are just a fresh undergrad, a fresh graduate. So they may want to see the coursework that you're bringing to the table. Writing samples. They may ask for writing samples so that they can see, right, how are you able to summarize information in a clear manner in a very short window? And so you're going to want to make sure that your writing samples are very tight, very clean, and are able to show a specific topic in a very short, window. And then references. They may ask for outside references, people that they can call that can vouch for you and talk about how you are as a professional, right, in a professional sense. So the resume. I won't last too long on the resumes and cover letters because, again, that's why you have your career resources, your career folks at Rutgers Camden. But I'll just spend a couple of minutes on what these two are and how you should prepare them. The resume is a one-page, recap of your professional relevant experience and should focus on the details and numbers that allows employers to see what you've done in the past and draw out what they're looking for from what you've done previously. And so there should be no spelling or grammatical errors because if an employer reads that, how are they going to trust you with their job if you can't even make sure that your resume is clean and tight? So make sure that you are going over your resume, making sure things are spelled correctly, and having someone else read it, like your writing centers or your career advisors. Again, these are people that are paid to help you in this journey. Your resume should be in reverse chronological order. So the most current thing that you're doing, the most current title you have should be up front and then go backwards. Again, bulleted list of relevant experiences in education. One pro tip that I often give to students is to have one running resume of everything you've done. So by the time you're applying to different jobs, you can pick and choose what are the relevant things to that specific position from what you've done in the past. And so that you're not forgetting anything that you've done additionally to that. It should also be a review of your relevant accomplishments. Again, things that awards that you've had, conferences that you publish, things that you have that are relevant to that specific position. Focus on details and numbers. Again, it's better to show than to tell, right? So if a student says, I managed a budget of $40,000, that's much better and gives a clear picture of what they're capable of rather than just saying, was in charge of a budget for these events. One is more detailed than the other, and again, shows the level of capacity and responsibilities that you've had in these positions. And again, should clearly connect to the job description. The cover letter. Again, something that us as students at the time when we learn about cover letters, I know we do not like, but it is important because it shows you're able to expand on the things that you've done previously and directly connect it to the job description that you are applying to. And so the opening paragraph is, again, introducing yourself and the position you're applying for. Then you move into the first paragraph, which is what we like to say the you. This is where it's a short summary of what you're applying for and should kind of entice the employer to keep on reading. Why should they stay interested in you as an applicant? Which should then move into the meat and potatoes, as I like to say, of the cover letter. And it's the me being the employer. So this is where you start taking pieces of what you've done previously and directly connect it to the job description that you're applying to, right? I like to say taking keywords from the job description itself and using that in your cover letter to show what you've done previously to that specific, term. So maybe it's project management. All right, use project management and show how you've done project management in past positions. Again, unpacking how you've done these things previously, and it's a clear connection to your resume that I can go to your resume and see, okay, this person did X, Y, and Z. But again, it's showing the employer, me, how you have already done this job. You've already excelled in a previous position. So this makes sense why you would be applying to this other position now. And then the last paragraph, the fourth paragraph, is the we. How are you and I going to work together to reach these goals, right? And it gives you a chance to deal with situations and recognize ways that you're going to prepare or anticipate for situations that may arise as me, the employer, and you as the employee. Again, how are we together going to reach different goals and get better as an organization? And so if you've covered the you being the applicant, me, the employer, which should be the meat and potatoes of the cover letter, excuse me, and the we, how are we going to work together once you're on board? That's kind of the structure for a cover letter. One last note that I'll say on cover letters. Again, I understand that it can be daunting to be applying to different positions and have to write multiple cover letters. But it is very evident as an employer when you're using and reusing a cover letter because it's very generic and it's not speaking to the job description specifically. And me as an employer, when I read that, that instantly turns me off just because I know that you're not really intentionally applying to this position. And so you're just reusing something that can be generically used for anything. That's not showing me how you have read through the job description, really thought about this position, and showing me that you've done your research previously. So I definitely would steer clear from reusing cover letters over and over again because it does come across to an employer that you're doing that. Other tips when you're applying to positions in international affairs. Be prepared to talk about the company and the job position. Again, come to the interview researched and ready, right? And come practiced if possible. I often, again, and I keep plugging your career services, but they are a great resource. You can schedule mock interviews. Interviewing is a skill, and I know we all get, nervous in doing the interview. I myself still get nervous when I interview, even if I'm the interviewer. But being able to prepare for it so that even when those nerves kick in, you're able to kind of hit the main points. That's going to help you in the long run. So by the time you leave the interview, you're not as worried that you didn't convey the information you wanted to say to the interviewer. Be prepared to talk about the interviewer. If you know who the interviewer is, someone will tell you who's going to be the person giving your interview. So just give a quick look on LinkedIn and see, what position they have and be able to ask them questions. Something that I do when I'm interviewing interns is, I give them a time to ask me questions. And I like to say, I interview you, but now it's your time to interview me. This is the perfect time to ask me questions about whether it be my position or the organization itself. Again, it shows that you've done some research on it and are intentionally applying to that position. I've already said practice the interview, stay in contact with the company. I can't stress enough how nice it is to receive, just a thank you email from someone that I've interviewed. It brings them to the forefront of my mind through the application process and, makes it so that you come off as very professional, and just thanking someone for their time is just a very nice, polite thing to do. Also important, shaping your LinkedIn profile. Some organizations do look at your LinkedIn profile before they interview you. So you want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is up to date, reflects what your resume says, and is as clean and professional as it can be. And then again, building your network, right? Continuing to stay in contact with classmates, alumni, and professors. Because again, you don't know who's going to be the person to recommend you for that new job. I know when I graduated from undergrad, it gets, you get very overwhelmed. You kind of want the perfect job. You think there's a perfect job out there. So I genuinely just told friends that I was looking for positions in a specific field and ended up being referred by one of my friends to actually Doctors Without Borders. He knew the person that was hiring, and that's how I kind of got into that position. So again, just building your network, continue to stay in contact with the people that you've encountered in undergrad is important. So we've talked a little bit about careers in international affairs, but there may be a point in your career where you think, maybe I need to go back to graduate school, right? And there are certain questions that students ask themselves when they're considered graduate school. The first is, why should you go to graduate school? Some go for the changes in salary. So there are certain positions that will pay you more solely because you have a master's degree. Some go for the mastering of a subject. So that's to say they want to be more knowledgeable on a specific topic. Some go for the career advancement portion. That is to say there are certain positions that are only available open to those with a master's degree. So for example, at the UN, if you're interested in working at the United Nations, There are certain positions that are only open to those that have a master's degree. And some go for the professional focus, right? There are certain courses or skills that they want to get that they don't feel like they can get from working in a specific organization. They want to get it in graduate school to then be able to employ those in their professional career. But ultimately, the question of why graduate school is a personal one. So you're going to have to sit with that before you apply to graduate school because the admissions committees are going to want to see that in your essays. And there is no right answer, right? There's not going to be one right answer for everyone. It really does come down to why are you pursuing this graduate degree for you and your professional trajectory. So we often recommend students to take at least a year in between their undergraduate degree and their pursuit of their graduate degree. Why is that? Because there's a lot of moving parts to a graduate school application. And it also allows you to get some professional experience, right? Going back to the previous slides that we talked about, getting professional experience is always great. But there's going to be a lot going on when you're applying to graduate school. So unlike in the undergraduate process, there is no common application. So you're going to be applying to graduate schools directly, and each may have their own different instructions, components of how to apply. And 12 months gives you ample time to do your research. So this is the time when we say you should be determining which programs you wish to pursue and casting a wide net, right? Researching and seeking out all graduate schools. I often talk to students that have these, ideas of this one specific school or the schools that we all know and love by name, but they may not have the right program for you, right? So, for example, yes, maybe you really, really want to go to Princeton, but you're not specifically interested in public service. Then applying to Princeton is not going to be the right choice for you because that's what that school is specifically reaching out to students for. Like their focus is public service. So if that's not a calling to you, you wouldn't be applying to a school like Princeton. Or, maybe you're really interested in Asia studies, but you only want to apply to Yale. Well, why not schools that have specific think tanks and research institutes for Asian studies, like UC San Diego or Singapore or the Lee Kuan Yew School in Singapore, right? Again, knowing that there's so many schools out there and doing your research and going beyond the name and the rankings is important as you're doing your research for graduate school. You also want to create a spreadsheet to track your deadlines. Like I said, there is no common application for graduate schools. So you're going to be applying to different schools that have their own different deadlines. Some may have, fixed fall deadline, some may have spring deadlines, some may have rolling admissions. So you want to make sure that you're keeping up with all of these deadlines in whatever way that you best track. Understanding your financial situation, right? And investigating financial aid options. This is going to be something that's going to be very important for graduate school. A lot of students leave the financial aid portion till the end. So that is to say they've submitted their application, they've been admitted, and now they come and ask about financial aid. Unfortunately, by this point, most universities and graduate schools have already allocated all of their financial aid. I often recommend students to think about financial aid as one of the first things if they are considering graduate school, because yes, graduate school is expensive and it continues to get more expensive. But there are a ton of ways to pay for graduate school that are not out of pocket, right? So it's just thinking about where you stand financially right now before you apply. How much can you realistically afford out of pocket will help you then to start to look for fellowships and scholarships to be able to pay for this graduate degree so that you're not in hundreds and thousands of dollars in debt once you've graduated. So what are a couple questions that you should be asking yourselves when you're considering graduate school to find the right program for you? The first is, what will you study? And this is talking about the academic structure of the program, right? So some students wish to have a very rigid program. That is to say they take courses in X, Y, and Z, and they get this one degree. Some like to be a little bit more flexible and combine different concentrations to ultimately create their own degree. Some, like myself, wanted to work during the day to then take courses at night. That's just what I wanted for my graduate experience. But maybe you're someone that best learns in the morning. And so you're looking for courses in the daytime. Maybe you're looking for a hybrid program, right? So you want to take courses online, but also be in class. Maybe you want a, fast track 1 year versus a traditional 2 year. Every program has a different academic structure, and even within the same graduate school, they may have different types of programs. So it's thinking about what the academic structure that is best for you is going to be important as you do your research. Are you qualified? Is the second question. And this is talking about the admissions criteria. Every school publishes their average admitted numbers, right? So use these as a guidepost to figure out where you stand before you apply. So you know what are the things you need to work on before you even have to apply to that school. So for example, if a school says the average admitted student had a 157 on their quant on the GREs, great. Now you know you have a number to strive for when you're taking the GREs. And again, this is not to say that if you don't hit all those numbers, you won't be admitted, or that if you hit all those numbers, you're automatically admitted. They are averages. So there are people that were above that number, and there are people that were below those numbers. But again, these are good guideposts to give you an idea of what are you going to be working on as you apply. Do you like being there? And this is talking about the living environment, right? I myself was born in New York City and I love a city. So I knew that I was always going to be applying to schools in large cities. But vice versa, maybe you're not looking to be in a city. Maybe you want something a little bit more suburban. Then a school, for example, in Washington, D.C. or New York City is not going to be the right option for you. Understanding where you're going to be and whether you actually enjoy being there is going to be important. If you're unable to take tours in person, most schools have virtual tours now that you can just take a look to see what the campus would look like. I used Google Maps when I was applying just to see my surroundings and figure out, how would I be getting to class if I was living off campus? What does off campus look like? What are the surrounding areas? Do I feel comfortable in these areas? Again, just getting a sense of where I would be for 2 years was important. And it will be important as you're doing the research for your skills. Can you afford it? Again, the financial situation. Understanding that that number that schools give you upfront is not covering everything. So if a school says it's 50,000 to attend, that's not covering books and supplies. It's not covering transportation. It's not covering living expenses, right? You're going to have to live somewhere. It's not covering meals. There's a lot that goes into being in that space. So understanding that that number is going to probably be higher is going to be important. And again, gives you an idea of what kind of financial aid and fellowships and scholarships you're going to be looking for to be able to afford going to that university. And then lastly, if there's anything that you take away from this slide or this portion of the presentation, the what comes next. Understanding the professional fit of the degree, right? I often recommend students to take a look at the alumni of the programs to see what they're doing with the degree. Ultimately, what you want to understand is what you can do realistically with this degree once you've graduated, right? Where are you headed after you've graduated from this graduate school? And understanding, again, how this fits into your professional trajectory is important. And it's going to be something that the admissions committee is really going to want to understand in your applications. There we go. All right, so as you're preparing to apply, we can't stress enough how all schools will vary as well, but be prepared to provide the following. An application form and an application fee. Yes, it does cost money to apply to each school, unfortunately. But a pro tip is some may have fee waivers. So not all. So please don't bombard every university with the question, do you have a fee waiver? But you can do some research. Sometimes they will list it on their website and they do provide fee waivers. So take a look at that. A CV or a resume, again, please know the difference. Also know the difference in the context of what country you're applying to, because they may have a different understanding of what a resume or a CV is. For example, in France, their version of a CV is our version here in the US of a resume. So you would need to provide a resume if you're applying to a graduate school program in France. So understand the difference and the cultural context differences. Official transcripts from each institution that you've matriculated into, especially if you've studied abroad for more than 6 months. Standardized test scores if they require them, such as the GRE or the GMAT. One quick note I'll say on the GREs, especially as many schools have now gone GRE optional. When a school says it's GRE optional, they truly mean it's optional. They're going to assess your skills and your ability to pass this program in different ways. And the GRE is just a component of it. But if you don't feel confident in your scores, if the score rate is not the average admitted score, if you don't feel it's going to make your application strong, You don't need to. They will find other ways to assess your skills that the GRE is meant to assess. So again, if the school says it's GRE optional, it truly is optional. Personal statements and or topical essays as they require them, 2 to 3 letters of recommendations, and your bank statements. Bank statements are for those that are applying to financial aid and or studying outside of their home country. Again, if you're a US citizen and you're looking to study in France, for example, you will need to provide your bank statement so that the graduate school and country know that you are able to sustain yourself during the 2 years that you will be in that location. All right, quickly, let's go over personal statements, right? How do you write a good personal statement for graduate school admissions? And we'd like to separate it into the 3 W's. The where have you been, where are you now, and where are you headed? The where have you been is where you start to outline your qualifications. This is where you talk about work or volunteer experiences, life experiences, really anything that has influenced your decision to apply to graduate school. So if you had an internship that you really, really loved and you figured out that you're really passionate about this one topic, this is the place to really lean into that because that's not going to be evident from your resume, right? It's not going to come across in the bulleted points that you listed out in your resume. Or vice versa. Maybe you had an internship that you really didn't like. However, it led you to another topic that you maybe are now interested in. This is where you talk about it in your essays. You don't have to spend too much time on this portion because they will have your resume and transcripts on hand so they know what you've done previously. But again, it's really expanding upon certain things that have now influenced your decision to apply to graduate school, which should lead you to the where are you now? And this is where you're conveying your passion. This is where you talk about what it is that you want to study and why does this topic excite you? And ultimately, what motivated you to go to graduate school at this moment? Not 2 years ago when a professor recommended it, not because the job market is bleak and you have no prospects and you have nothing else to do, so why not grad school? That's not a good reasoning. You really want to show where it is that you are currently, that graduate school makes sense. It's the next logical step in your professional trajectory, which should lead you to the last portion of the essay, the where are you headed? What comes next, right? Explaining your goals. Why this school and why this program in particular? And again, what will you do with this degree once you have it? That is not to say that you have to come in and say, 5 minutes after graduation, I'm going to be working at the UN under OCHA doing monitoring and evaluation. No one has their whole life planned out like that, usually. However, you should have a realistic understanding of how this degree fits into your professional, formulation. How does it make sense that you're applying into this, going into this degree, getting this degree, and then you're going to the next step in your professional trajectory? So once you've outlined your qualifications, which is the where have you been, you've conveyed your passion, where are you now currently, and now you've explained your goals, where are you headed after graduation, that is the foundation for a graduate school essay or admissions. One last note on essays, please make sure that you are utilizing your word count to the best of your ability. Some schools will give you a word count. You can't go over, maybe 500 words. And that is just for them to be able to see whether you can, craft a personal statement succinctly, be able to convey this information in a succinct manner. But you also want to make sure it's free of grammatical errors. And so going to your writing centers, having someone else look at it, as well as thinking about it in this way. It is your 30-second elevator pitch, as we like to say in DC. By the time you're applying to graduate school, many things are out of your control. You can change your undergrad GPA. You can change your GRE scores at this point. You can change what a recommender says. But you have full and complete control over what you say in a personal statement. So keep that in mind as you're crafting these essays. So what do schools look for in a graduate school applicant? The first two are fairly straightforward. It's an aptitude for study and a chance of success in the program, right? You're applying to a school, so they want to see how you've done academically previously. But they also want to see experiences and perspectives that will help others succeed. So they're building a holistic class. That is to say, they want people from different walks of life, right? You may be a student, an undergrad coming straight into graduate school, seated next to someone that had been working 5, 10 years in their field and is now in graduate school, right? So they want to see things that may be a little, different. There is no one path into graduate school or international affairs. So what was your path into this space and into this graduate school program? And then lastly, again, I'm beating a dead horse, I know, but it is important. a clear sense of professional direction. Where are you heading after this, right? Graduate school is not your end goal. What is your end goal, and how does graduate school fit into this? Paying for school, the big one, right? We have often so many questions about paying for graduate school. And there are a ton of ways of doing your research. It really comes down to doing it early. And this is coming from someone who did exactly the opposite of what I'm telling you today to do. You want to do your research as early as you can because there's many fellowships and scholarships available to you all, but they may have their own applications, instructions, deadlines, and you don't want to miss out. But let's go through a couple of ways of thinking about how do you pay for graduate school that is not necessarily out of pocket. The first is merit and need-based aid. Know the difference. Some schools will offer you both. Some schools only offer one type of aid, and some schools sadly offer neither. So make sure you understand what your financial aid package means when they give you, a merit-based aid award. Research or teaching assistant positions. This is traditionally seen within the PhD track, not as much as the master's level, but there are certain universities that do provide TA positions or RA positions for students. There's also assistance provided by the Central University of Programs within the school. So you're most likely applying to a school within the larger university system. So asking whether there are funds available at the larger system is always, helpful. There's also working for the university, right? Certain universities will pay for a portion or all of your tuition if you are a full-time staff member at that university, or sometimes even if you're a part-time staff member. So taking a look at this option if it interests you. And all the ones I just mentioned are internal ways, so they will be specific to the universities you're applying to, but there are also external sources of funding, grants and loans. Please know the difference. One you don't have to pay back, the other you sadly do, unfortunately. And then scholarships. So how do you do your research for scholarships, right? You can do it based on your career interests. If you know already what careers you may be interested in, there's probably a fellowship or scholarship that is funding that entry into that career. So, for example, for those of you that are interested in working with the State Department or the U.S. Agency of International Development, you can apply to the Pickering Rangel Fellowships or Payne Fellowships, excuse me. There are fellowships and scholarships based on things you've done in the past. So, for example, if you're a returning Peace Corps volunteer, there's the Coverdell Fellows Program. You can do your research based on your citizenship. You can do your research based on your nationality. You can do your research if you're underrepresented in a certain field. You can do your research if you're first generation. So if you're the first student in your family to go to graduate school, there is funding available and scholarships available to you. This is all to say there are a ton of ways of doing research for fellowships and scholarships, and there are many scholarships out there. It really just comes down to doing the research as early as possible. We have a great page on our website, fellowships and scholarships page that lists many fellowships and scholarships that our member schools have taken and accept. So I definitely recommend you all to start there. But again, it'll come down to creativity and thinking about, how to look for these fellowships and scholarships as early as you can. But with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. We have a couple of links that I always like to point to. Our events link that shows all of the great opportunities, webinars, in-person events that we have at APSIA or our member schools have, such as our online graduate school fairs. We have those every year, twice a year, one in July and one in the fall. This fall, we have it in October next week for those that are watching later on, so October 24th, 2024. That is of interest to you, definitely head to our links and connect with us in person or virtually. Fellowships and scholarships page. We have our graduate schools programs page where you can take a look at all of the member schools and affiliates that are part of the APSIA family. Our international career guide that breaks down international affairs into the four main sectors and gives you an idea of what companies or organizations you may be looking into and working with. What are the courses you may be taking and skills that you will be looking to build both in graduate school or while you're working in that space. And job openings. We have a jobs board that organizations often submit to that we're constantly posting. So head over to that jobs board if you're interested in looking at opportunities in the international affairs space. My email is there listed that you can see it, brianna@apsia.org, and I'm always happy to connect with students. So just send me an email if there are questions and happy to connect after this. So with that, I'm going to stop my slides and my sharing, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura for a quick wrap up. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Brianna. I think that was incredibly thorough. I can't imagine that there are questions, but I'm certain if there are, students will direct them to you. I also just wanted to, as we're wrapping things up, celebrate the fact I'm so appreciative of your time, but also how beautifully you really highlighted students coming to these graduate programs and professions with lived experiences. I think that's really going to resonate with our population, many of whom are the first in their families to go to college, many of whom do have those financial challenges that you've outlined. And I think you did a really beautiful job of celebrating that people come from all different backgrounds to these paths and that there is a way forward, with good research and lots of support and this determination. And so I hope that students will not only reach out to you for very specific questions about this path, but know that as you've identified, we have the Career Center on our campus. We do, in fact, have a writing center. And of course, you have our office, OSDFA. We support our students in applying for many of those competitive fellowships that you identified. So I thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to welcoming you back to campus, hopefully sometime soon.
Hopefully, I'm always available. So thank you. Just let me know when.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you all.